For those of you who, again, are joining us for the first time, my name is Tony. I run the growth practice here at Mucker Capital. We're an early stage VC firm focusing on Series A and seed. We also run an accelerator program. But really, the star of today's show are Helena and Sarah. They are the co-founders of Mind the Gap Services, which is essentially a fractional CMO consultancy. So if you guys need help around anything related to go-to-market, marketing, and even today's case around collecting feedback for your product development, they are a great resource and they've been longtime friends of Mucker. So, Helena and Sarah, welcome. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Hello, everyone. We are so excited to be joining you today and talking about one of our very favorite topics, customer feedback. As Tony mentioned, I'm Helena Fowler, co-founder and managing director of Mind the Gap Services. I'm also a doctor of clinical nutrition, and I have over 20 years of marketing strategy and product strategy experience across many areas of tech, working with early stage startups all the way through enterprise businesses. Sarah and I met while working at Bitly. We were brought on to lead marketing efforts in a post-acquisition environment, and we realized pretty quickly that we have many things in common. Two of them being we're often asked to create things that just don't exist. And we're both really skilled at identifying gaps and connecting dots across the business. And most often, the gaps we see happen across marketing, product, and sales, which is why we're called Mind the Gap Services.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Petty, co-founder and managing director, Mind the Gap Services. We specialize in helping startups at those important inflection points to assist them to grow and scale and hit their goals. Our specialty, besides being the 911 call for founders, is decades of experience in product strategy, marketing strategy, and sales. And it is my absolute pleasure to be here because it is a full circle moment. I actually worked with Mucker founders about 10 years ago and was able to help them on their journey, which led them to an acquisition. So let's move on to the presentation. And so, as we present our slides, we will discuss our case studies and what we have experienced helping founders along their way. So first topic, feedback and sources. Before I get into the example of sources and types that you could look into, I want you to keep in mind some reference points and topics so there isn't that overwhelming feeling of undertaking customer feedback. Because this will take a lot of effort and time, we all want to choose wisely what we focus on. So make sure those foundational documentation and research is done. Make sure you've researched and you feel comfortable with the TAM, that total addressable market, or another way to look at it, that amount that you could serve, your SAM, your serviceable addressable market, that reachable market, and the SUM, the serviceable attainable market, which you should prioritize because it is what you can capture. Just a note, for a lot of startups that we have worked with recently in their pitches, their pitch deck to investors, they focus too much on the TAM and not enough of the current customer or that sum. So be specific. Do not trust friends and family if not truly part of that target audience that you are focusing on for feedback. Differentiate when gathering feedback from your current customer versus that potential. This will help you track more precisely and lay that good foundation from the direction you can take your product. Part of what you keep in mind, not only about being economical, we're all startups here, but also that instant and reliable feedback when deciding upon the source and the customer type. Look at interviews, email surveys, and those in-app widgets. The second thing to think about is that product integrated free subscription like Hotjar or GA, A/B testing, those referral testings, and look at community and social. So check in with current customers, do those health check for that instant feedback. And social listening. We all know that people do not tend to hold back when commenting their true feelings. And this is another free way to look at what customers are actually saying. And you can also check in and see if they've saved anything that you've posted and check with them on a DM. Another thing to make sure you have done in great detail is that competitor analysis. This is key to understand your ICP and to know your key differentiators, which leads to what customer feedback is crucial to look at and of course, look at your competitors. A good question to ask yourself is, what are successful competitors doing and can it be used for my product? But don't replicate. Think of that hypothesis. Why is this working and how can you utilize it within your key differentiators? Number 5, this is the hot topic. Utilize AI with caution. So AI costs money and it's not a turnkey solution. Recently, an MIT study came out and said the best AI products successfully completed just 30% of the real world office tasks assigned to them, most doing much worse. So 2 pieces of advice: gather information and utilize AI as much as possible within those free tools and apply it to help you assist in analyzing. But if it's AI generated, make sure it's user verified. So take that time into consideration. As a startup ourselves, we partner with an AI company to cut our lead gen time in half. And this has taken quite a bit of time to establish. We're almost at the year mark and we're still not there yet. So lastly, partnerships. Tapping access and into your different friends that have startups with similar customer targets, and you can learn from and share in the costs. This is a great way to understand your target market. There are plenty of startups out there, as you know, and I remember at Mucker in the Santa Monica-based office, everyone sits together and that energy is very vibrant there. So tap into who you have right in front of you. One of the things also that I loved about the startup spirit is that everyone is usually pretty free to share information and to help one another out. So think about that for your partnerships. Next slide. Okay, here's the list that you can reference for sources. As you can see, there's indirect, direct, and inferred ways that you can gather feedback. You do not need to use every one of these. Again, everything takes time and money and resources. So think about the combination to start with. There isn't going to be that single source of truth. There's no special recipe. You will have to test and collect repeatedly. You can utilize this as a checklist. And types. Here's a reference list for 9 different types of customer feedback that we have utilized at MTGS. I think the best advice as someone who has worked with quite a few startups is to stay organized from the beginning and set up simple, distinct systems, which we will cover later, and then integrate. So these integration guidelines saved me and many times. So create that separate feedback streams, but cross-reference the insights. Use internal feedback to validate and challenge the external patterns. And weight external feedback more heavily for product decisions, obviously, since they're using it, and internal for strategic directions. A good example is I worked for a white label e-commerce startup, and we dealt with multiple publishers at once. And these integration guidelines, receiving feedback from different customers from all different types of publishers, was key to keep it organized, and it saved so much time and money. Methods to streamline your feedback. So let's discuss some of these systems that I was referring to before. Decide upon a unified feedback management system. It doesn't have to be a fancy platform, Google Sheets, Airtable, lots of free tools, but make sure the tool is universally used and accessible and tagged with an agreed upon system specifically in one source of truth. Categorization. Use the sorted system that works best for you, but the main categories that we have used are feature request, product issue, customer experience, and market fit feedback. You can also mark these up in subcategories, which we have specified in a template that you can access after this webinar. Some of those subcategories, like for feature requests, are it is a core product, or it's about mobile, it's about reporting, or it's a product issue and it's a critical bug or a UX friction that they've given feedback on. Then look at the system of tagging. Be consistent and specific now. Some examples are you can use urgency, critical, high, medium, low, or if it's a tech effort, quick win, medium, or large effect. One additional note, when you tag, also think of internal versus external feedback. Know that internal focus is asking the team, investors, advisors, and they are going to be inherently more focused on, is this technically doable? Does it go with our timeline? Is it OKR focused? And for external feedback, it'll be from those customers or about the product and market. This is when you look at those interviews, usability tests, support interactions like a learning video or a webinar. And lastly, when consolidating feedback, think about cadence, that internal review across all forms of feedback. The challenge in establishing ways of getting customer feedback at the right moment in the customer journey, making sure you eliminate potential biases that may skew customer feedback. So think about external customer metrics to track, the volume, the source. Think about internally setting meetings for quick overview with the entire team or monthly deep dives to make decisions with only stakeholders. And even if you have a small team, as you grow, it's important to start this cadence now. And know that cadence can change from a big launch or a bigger investment in campaigns. An example for us in consolidating and aggregating feedback in high stakes atmosphere was for a health tech company. I had to make sure that I differentiated the physicians, the patients, and the insurance companies. But due to the startup being a highly regulated vertical, it became crucial to validate and prioritize accordingly, which we will discuss later on in this deck.
All right. Let's get to validating feedback. I'm going to be going over many approaches to validating feedback. You're not meant to use all of these all of the time or even at the same time. You'll find some work best at specific times, like in ideation phase, or maybe as you're launching an MVP and beyond. Some of them build on each other and will work very well together, and I'll speak to some of those as they come up. The idea here is to choose what works best for your organization. So, the very first here is what I call the AFF, Awareness Feature Functionality. And this honestly has been my go-to over the years for hundreds of launched features, bugs, pieces of feedback. It's been my go-to because of its simplicity. I can use it as this single question. Is this piece of feedback? Is it an awareness, feature, or functionality issue? You can use this at any point in the product or service development lifecycle. It makes it just really easy to quickly parse through feedback, bugs, or requests. You assign a high-level cause, obviously not meant to identify or diagnose a root cause, and then route it to whoever needs to look into it and provide the solution. Going to the next slide, you can see how I've deconstructed it here to show how it would work in practice in a more detailed manner. You can see that each question is followed by a high-level solution, the quick determination of who might be solving the problem, and examples of what the solve can look like. I used this often while at a skincare company that had a large portfolio of homegrown tech products. Like, I never worked on the skincare products, only the tech side, and this we often used to help us parse through feedback as it came in, regardless of how large or small our whatever we might have been working on was. More often than not, what was reported as a feature failure was really a lack of awareness or education in how something worked. So we were shipping products that could often affect dozens of users, some that could affect hundreds of thousands, and some that could even affect millions of users. And this was a single way, or there was no single solution that was going to make everyone happy. And this made it easy to help us understand very quickly what was working, what wasn't, and how best we could solve for it. Next. So Sarah touched on this briefly earlier with weighting external feedback for product decisions and using internal feedback for strategic decisions. It's important to understand the weight a piece of feedback carries. So what comes next is a series of questions that you can use to help determine which feedback actually merits action. You can use it at any point in the product or service development cycle. It's equally useful for when you get feedback from users as it is from when you get insights that are surfaced to you from a product usage platform. It's particularly useful when there are conflicting opinions on how to proceed. I've also found this to be helpful in the immediate post-launch period, like after a beta, an MVP, or beyond. And I've often used this in partnership with the AFF from the previous slide. I've broken this up into questions you can ask for feature requests versus questions that you would ask for critical feedback. Sometimes it's really easy to identify the obvious yeses and nos for things to take action on. And I found these questions to be particularly helpful when there's a lack of alignment or conflicting perspectives about whether or not something should be fixed or built and the time frame for completion. I'm not going to go through every single one of these because you'll be getting the slides, but I will give you an example. What is before I get to the example, what's most important to note, though, is that the questions under feature requests can be used as early on as idea validation. So if you don't yet have an MVP, instead of asking, will a feature add to revenue, you can ask, will it create revenue? Instead of, will it increase stickiness, will it create stickiness, and so on. Feedback around feature requests should be viewed through the lens of what they add compared to bugs and critical feedback. Things that require fixing or addressing, those should be viewed through the lens of impact. And finally, the last thing to consider when we're talking about weighting, if we can go to the next slide, are things that you want to align on. If you haven't yet, you will experience a time when feedback comes from a single individual and it'll be flagged as a must do. You'll also run into times when there's a lack of consensus around what to take action on and how to move forward. This column is designed to help you navigate those moments. And these are questions that you should think about before being right in that moment. And founders, and I know we have a lot of founders here, so I just want to speak directly to you for a moment. Just be aware that your voice and your words carry weight. I've definitely been in several instances where offhand comments or a nice to have has been expressed in passing and has been interpreted as a must have and a priority, and it becomes a priority. This becomes a bigger concern as you grow, especially when you go from everyone wearing many hats to being more of subject matter expert owners. So it's important to align on how you plan to handle feedback that comes from a single source, whether that's from you, the founder, from a beta participant, your first customer, or maybe your highest value customer. Also consider how applicable to all customers the feedback needs to be for it to be implemented. Understand how you want to handle requests or fixes that may not align with your ICP, your SOM, your primary problem to solve, and or your OKRs. Lastly, discuss how willing you will be to hold yourselves accountable to sticking to what you align upon. Be sure you understand what accountability actually means for your organization. This approach can be used with customer feedback, marketing efforts, product roadmap discussions, and more. While it's a way to validate feedback, it can also be helpful in prioritizing or pre-prioritizing efforts as well. It can be especially helpful during a beta or even in the immediate post-launch phase when there's a great number of bugs or fixes or requests that are likely to hit. So an example here, I was sitting in a launch war room after a release of a really large set of features to a high value set of users, and they had been experiencing various levels of issues. We had some very minor ones. We had, sadly, a couple catastrophic ones. We had many that were in between. Our UX team noticed some padding issues with in-app text and wanted this fixed ASAP. From their perspective, this was a critical fix. The questions in the middle column were helpful in consensus building and defining what was a nice to have versus a need to have. That specific fix was not fixed ASAP because there was not a single yes to any of the questions in either of the first two columns. Next, looking at the data you already have from a different perspective or lens is one way you can start to parse between what a customer says they want compared to what their behavior says. And this involves syncing the data from marketing or research motions, or really anywhere that you get customer feedback from, with actual usage data and patterns. So look at what your existing customer or type of customers have had to say and what conclusions that allows you to draw. For this exercise, you're not looking at the performance of the marketing content or the campaign itself. You're looking deeper into how it's connected to that product usage, the adoption, the revenue, the conversions, etc. It's in these spaces you can validate what they say versus reality. And so before we get into an example, let's just talk about some of these sources. For the marketing and adjacent data, go beyond general data points like open rates, impressions, ratings, general performance related metrics. Instead, take a look at, if you're looking at email, instead of just looking at how many people clicked on that CTA and went to that landing page or wherever it goes to, where'd they go after that? What was their behavior after that? If you're looking at social media, instead of looking at engagement numbers and looking at rates of total impressions and things, Check out the comments. Sarah mentioned this too. Look at the comments, and obviously people are going to be much more likely to vent, but take those for a grain of salt. But you can usually also find some pertinent comments in there. Same thing with reviews. Instead of necessarily looking at your customer experience or your customer satisfaction, you can look at this from an experience, functionality, and feature perspective. For product usage, it's going beyond general usage stats and really digging in deep to how they're moving through the product. Which areas are they finding to be most useful, and what are they, or they're using the most, and why? Why are they using those the most? Does that validate a hypothesis you had about what you thought they would use? Finally, consider non-traditional sources of data. I'll say that every point of input that captures customer feedback is up for consideration here, be that customer support chat notes, sales meeting notes, or even QBR feedback. So now let's sorry, I paused there, but I actually have an example. And this is a multi-scenario example. This I think is pretty common. Let's say that you conducted some interviews and somebody that you conducted an interview with said that they want and would definitely use a certain report. Maybe they even said that they would pay to have access to this report. And so in the first scenario, you've developed and launched it based on that feedback. How can you use existing data to validate the quality of that customer feedback and the resources that went into building and launching it? You can, of course, check the product usage of the report. Is it low? You can go back to the AFF. Is this an awareness issue? Do they not understand how to use it? Or is it a visibility issue? Is there some sort of functionality or a key feature missing? Is it loading slowly? Is it not pulling in the data accurately? Do you not have key filters? Whatever it is. The point here is that if none of those things are occurring, if it's not one of those three things, then this might have been a nice to have versus a need to have that was expressed. You can also compare that new report to the performance of a similar report. In the second scenario, a decision has been made to create the report, and maybe the report has even been developed, but it has yet to be launched. Consider rolling it out to a beta group or a small percentage of users, but making sure that those users are representative of the cross-section of the group you believe will use and pay for it. Initiate a feedback loop utilizing a test, learn, iterate, and refine process, and then use the beta group or the small group of users as an opportunity to gain as much understanding as makes sense for the relative importance of this report. And what I mean here is that if you don't see this report as being an income generator, or if it's not meaningfully adding to the experience, if it's not reducing churn or doing something else in a meaningful way, don't bring out all the bells and whistles and a parade for this report. Just be mindful of syncing your level of effort with this report. Scenario 3, the decision has been made, but the report hasn't been developed yet. So you can take the opportunity to further validate the concept before developing it. You can create a high fidelity mockup. You can show a group of your target ICP this mockup and solicit their feedback. You can have them test a version in a sandbox. And you can be sure to ask really good questions. And we'll get to it a little bit later about what types or what sort of questions are really good questions. In the last scenario, you receive some feedback, but you're still deciding what course of action to take. You can look at reports that you already have that exist, and you can look at their usage patterns, and then consider what makes this new requested report different. What makes it valuable? Can you get that data somewhere else? If yes, why aren't users getting it from the existing solution? If no, what's the reason behind not having had this request sooner? Hopefully you've been consolidating and aggregating some of your customer feedback in this scenario, so you can also take a look at that and see if this request has come up before. Was it considered and ruled out? Were there tech limitations previously? Are there just different circumstances now? And again, depending on the size, scope, cost, etc., you can ask formal or informal groups for their thoughts. You can do a quick poll on social media, take it to an advisory group, conduct customer or prospective customer interviews, and you can even ask internal team leads that see and receive customer feedback, or whoever it is on your team that receives customer feedback, their thoughts based on what they're seeing. I highly encourage you, though, to seek external opinions. Finally, leaning into AI tools can help you pull all of these sources together, or the raw data, and analyze that and help you with the analysis. I'll say that many customer support chat tools have AI components that report on trends, so use that to your advantage.
Hey, Helena.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Go
I have
for
a
it.
question. Could you go back to the
Yeah.
slide, please? So can you give us an example of some of the marketing and adjacent data, in particular email and search ads? What kind of data be useful to inform product development requirements or bugs?
That's a great question. So for email, there's always the breadcrumb, right? And wait, it was email and what was the second one?
Yeah, email and search ads.
And search. So I think what those two have in common, often the metric of success for the email or the search ad are how many times people landed on the CTA or the landing page, wherever that little action button drives them to. And sure, that'll tell you the success of that campaign, but it's not going to help inform your roadmap. What you want to know is where they're going after that. And are they actually, if you're in a SaaS model, are they navigating to your tiers? To wherever you might go to make a purchase? Are they going to the purchase flow? What's your rate of drop off? Where is that point where it might be too sticky or not frictionless enough? Are your value propositions, again, if you have a SaaS tool, how are you communicating the value prop for each of those for the products that are being positioned? And then looking at where the friction is, that's where you can start to see where you might build something into the experience there. And if you have people say you're working on conversion and they're already a free user, then taking a look at usage patterns in app to drive that conversion. So if the email is targeting existing customers, but they're not converting, taking a look at where that friction is. Does that help answer that?
Yeah, yeah. Do you have like
Okay.
an example that you could think of? A particular company that you guys worked with where you
Yeah.
looked at some of these search ad data points or, email click-through rates that helped you guys be informed?
Yeah, for sure. So when Sarah and I were at Bitly, we did this very often with conversion and churn in helping to minimize churn and helping to increase conversion between tiers. I'm not going to give you a specific example of a campaign just to be mindful of confidentiality, but I will say that we were constantly looking at email and just, again, going beyond email to say, oh, this was great. It had X% open rate. Well, what did that actually mean for driving conversion? And then we would also look at specifically, because we would often send to existing users to get them to convert or existing users at a certain tier to encourage them to get to the next tier. We were looking at where they were spending time within the actual app and then utilizing some of the in-app messaging and prompts. We were finding that some folks were not aware that they could very easily take some actions from within the product. So they didn't know that they could build a QR code, for instance, in addition to shortening something and utilize a specific feature. And so we actually worked with the UX team to create some in-app prompts and just for discovery purposes. And that helped bring more value to it. So the next time we ran this campaign, we highlighted this and that helped to drive that. I don't know if that helps.
Okay.
Sarah, is there anything else that you want to highlight there?
No, that's a good example, what I was thinking.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's go into leading with what? Challenging the 5 whys. So the 5 whys, as I'm sure you're all aware, was very popular many years ago as a way of trying to problem solve. And I'm not saying here that you shouldn't ask why ever, but I do think it's time to retire why as a go-to question. And the reason for doing this is that why can sometimes feel very personal. Even more so with the popularity of Simon Sinek, who says we should be leading with why. And even though that's like a bigger why for our purpose, it inherently personalizes something. And if you think about it, when we ask questions, and I'm like super curious, I was that annoying kid that asked why for everything. And my parents were definitely happy when I got out of that phase, or at least stopped externalizing it as much. So this was hard for me to drop too. But if you think about it, when you ask, why are we doing this? Why is this important? Why does this matter? It can all set up the person that you expect to answer those questions to be on the defensive, because it can come across or be interpreted as, why are you doing this? Why do you think this is important? Why do you think this matters? You can get to the same answer, but faster and without the undertones of personalizing the question by switching to what. It feels less like an interrogation and more like curiosity and growth mindset. So some examples for this are, instead of saying, why are we doing this? That can become, what are we trying to achieve? Why is this important? Becomes, what is driving the urgency of this request? Why does this matter? Becomes, what makes this a critical need? Or what do we gain, by taking this course of action? And instead of, why do you say that? You can go with, what makes you say that? It just helps to reframe the question. All right. And finally, for one of the most important aspects of validating feedback is just being willing to challenge your assumptions and what you think you know. Be willing to challenge your own perspective without taking it personally. It's important to stay focused on what will best serve your customer population and the key problem you're trying to solve, but there's also the need to not get stuck in one way of thinking. There's a lot of value in challenging your own assumptions, especially for features or products that are not super straightforward, maybe when there's conflicting opinions. So as a thought experiment, try taking on the opposite perspective and arguing for it. It can be illuminating. And I'll say that one of the best ways to validate is to ask better questions. When you're talking to your customers or you're talking to potential customers, if you're doing some of these interviews, instead of simply saying, hey, would you like this feature? Or would you use this service? Or do you find this thing useful? Use questions that are open-ended and that utilize what and how. Harkening back to the previous slide, you can focus on your benefits based on the problem you're solving. Make them quantifiable. How many, how much questions? How much time would this save you? How many more clients would this help you close? They could be aspirational. What would this feature allow you to do that you can't do today? They could be cost-centered. How much would you pay for this feature or ability? Or value-centered. How valuable do you find X? What makes it valuable? And what does valuable mean to you? If you use value-based questions, it's important to understand how the person that you're asking defines valuable, and then compare that to how you define it internally. I'll say here that one of my easiest experiences with this is when I was at a skincare company, we would ask people, and again, I worked on the tech products. It's like, hey, would you find this thing useful? And this is often what some of our folks would ask. And it's like, oh, yes, of course we'd find it useful. Of course we will use it. No, they didn't really. No one's going to say that they don't really want something, especially if it's not going to cause them to have to pay more for an experience, right? Ask better questions.
Okay, now that we've talked about validation, let's talk about prioritization. So this, I thought, was a great example. This was my dry cleaners about 3 weeks ago. Luckily, no one was hurt, but as you can see, it completely decimated the owner's business and his family's only livelihood. This I thought about founders because it's something that could be completely overwhelming, a good visual of how to prioritize and where to start is something that we all are going through right now as founders and with startups. So what would you do? What would you do when you're feeling this so overwhelmed? You're thinking about, how you're going to get your only source of income, your only business up and running, and you feel just inundated with suggestions, criticism, and feedback when you're just starting out. So what is the problem you're solving for? You're thinking about what is that macro view. And I feel like a lot of people aren't focused on the overall goal, which is to be a functioning dry cleaner and to rebuild a functioning shop here. And then how would you think about prioritizing? Well, the owner, he thought about the police report, the insurance. So the insurance company gets the right report, and then they go to the restoration company for damages and a plan is agreed upon. And then I thought about, okay, from there, they do have to have that cross-team alignment because it's from different departments. So after getting the damage report and the construction task with the timeline and approval from insurance company, should the owner go back and forth and change the layout or the rebuild or ask for different machinery? And the answer is no, because it would cause that delay and the overall solve for the problem to be a functioning, revenue positive place of business. This may seem obvious, but we want to emphasize that receiving feedback, please don't go back and forth to being that solely founder or CEO or product-led or VIP customer-led startup. Startups who keep changing direction of key prioritization tasks that are already agreed upon do not make the progress that they need to succeed. We've seen it over and over again. So manage expectations, analyze, assess, ask the questions and what problem you are trying to solve for your customer. And an example I have for this is a startup I work for in the health, wellness, and media tech company. Was every time we'd go through the step of validating feedback from advisors, from some customers, and intertwining our milestones and prioritizing the roadmap, the CEO would see a psychic and panic and want to change things instantly. And it wouldn't be, there would be no valid blocker or risk or reason to do so. So I thought this was a good lesson and a good visual to say, like, take it step by step, look at the overall problem and what your goal is, and don't speak to psychics. Okay, so let's get into the ways to prioritizing after validating. The tier system for prioritization is simple and utilized across many different departments and people. So tier 1 is that high level of resource and time and money, but a larger benefit that supports the company's objectives. Tier 2 is the medium level of key features and enhancements of resources and impact to the users. And tier 3 is those smaller features with less impact. Don't forget about the level of effort. Agree upon the level of effort guidelines that fit into each tier in order to determine how many tier 1s a team can handle. So tier 1 level of effort for your company may be 2 devs working for 3 months. Tier 2 could be 1 dev for 1 month, or tier 3 could be no dev and maybe just design work. Think about the tiers specific to your level of effort, budget, milestones, and capacity. Startups tend to forget about level of effort and they commit to the tier 1s, and there's too many to do. One company we partnered with completely disregarded this, and we saw it right away. The team felt overwhelmed and they could not hit all their goals, but it was because they were committing to too many tier 1s. Once you establish that threshold within that scoring system and how much you can take and how many tiers and what it supports, stick with it and then move forward. The good thing about the tier 1 system is that it can easily fit into the categorization of feedback that we discussed before. So a tier 1 could be those feature requests, the new functionality, the core product, the integration. A tier 2 could be those product issues, those critical bugs, the minor issues, the more minor issues. Customer experience could be tier 1 to tier 3, depending on what the feedback is. And tier 3 could be that market fit. Another way to prioritize is just through a decision matrix and prioritization scorecard. We love a good scorecard. So here are examples of questions to ask. What is the level of customer impact, the level of business impact? What is your ROI? What is the team success? What is the level of the team successfully implementing? We don't really, for startups, think about capacity or like in the sense of how many resources is used, because we know so many of you are wearing multiple hats, as are we. And how urgent is it? You can also utilize the decision matrix to feed the tier system by allocating tiers to the threshold and or scoring into the tiers. So utilize something very simple, high, medium, low. You can do the threshold example. I left one there. And some case studies we have is with internal feedback and hitting another customer target. So 2 actually startups that we've worked with both wanted to understand if and how they could reach those millennials. And after gathering internal and external feedback and applying the AFF method and weighting the asks, we use this decision matrix to invest more time and money in developing the marketing strategy to hit the milestones for the millennials. So in the next 2 slides, there are more detail-oriented assessment systems to use, such as this example of a quantitative impact scale to answer the decision matrix about what is really the impact. You can answer tier questions this way. In this example, we actually use KPIs and what the percentage is of of the feedback actually addressing a KPI and how many KPIs. This was a great way to understand and to really hit those goals in a very more exact manner. And in the next slide, I have an example of the qualitative impact scale, the t-shirt size, asking those questions and giving an estimate. Okay, if within these questions, will this drive paid new subscribers, or will this help customer retention? And the majority or the medium or the minimal amount is the level 1, 2, or 3, but kind of giving that estimate. And we do have this again in all the templates we can provide for you after this webinar.
All right. So there's often no quicker way to prioritize feedback than by simply identifying how the feedback or the request helps you solve your ICP's primary problem. Because of this, you might find it useful as a initial litmus test for whether something gets an immediate yes or no, before moving on to some other way to validate and prioritize. This, as you may remember, was also one of the items in the Align On column from the waiting section. Ultimately, if the feedback you're taking action on or the feature that you're developing doesn't clearly align to the problem you're solving, then you should probably ask, what is the reason behind this decision? Similarly, you can also use OKRs to help prioritize your feedback and requests as well. Identify which OKR the feedback or feature aligns to and include this alignment on your product development roadmap. Your roadmap is a high visibility source of truth. So including your OKR alignment here ensures everyone is aware of how and why something is being actioned. And once again, if the feedback you're taking action on or a feature that you're developing doesn't align to an OKR, then ask, what is the reasoning behind this decision?
Cross-team alignment. So do not be siloed, even if there's only 2 people. I've seen it happen time and time again. Insufficient alignment should not be your blocker to your traction or retention goals for the customer. Be empathetic. So empathy, I believe, is a superpower for founders. Put yourself in someone's shoes. They're not just commenting or asking for features for no reason at all. And do not take anything personally. After managing lots of teams, I've realized that there is some ways to address certain feedback in a one-on-one basis or with the whole team. But have regular meetings, have that cadence to review feedback with a larger team, but only with pertinent stakeholders when you need to make decisions or give scoring or think about it from a leadership perspective. This will happen faster than you think. Your team will grow and kind of really think about who's in the room. The whole saying, too many cooks in the kitchen, is true. And know and stay focused on KPIs or goals for your business. One of the coolest things I learned from a couple of different startups and established businesses was I love the way they said the KPIs, the goals in the beginning of every meeting, going over feedback. It was easier to answer questions that way and to understand whether we should move forward or prioritize on certain tasks. And lastly, stay on path to the agreed upon action plan. Give yourself time, give yourself grace to see if what you've established is working. And lastly, so growth. Growth is what all startups want to do. And what does it require? The number one action that I've seen new founders and some seasoned founders do that can cause a delay in growth is impulse decision making. Things take time. Be consistent. Stay the course. Do not change directions because one VIP in your life gave random feedback. And don't listen to psychics. We will leave with this quote to think about. Ongoing consistency is much more important than short-term intensity. Thank you, and please feel free to reach out for templates, more case studies, and we're open to having discussions with you guys. Just reach us at info@mindthegapservices.com.
All right. Cool. So thanks for walking us through that. And those of you that are still with us, if you have questions, go ahead and type it in the Q&A box. Let me start by presenting you guys with 3 real life scenarios that I see all the time with my portcos, and I'd love to get your feedback on how to address them. Okay. So first scenario is we're working with early stage founders in our accelerator program, and they're developing an MVP. And oftentimes it's difficult for some of these first time founders to really narrow down and place an emphasis on minimal in MVP, minimal viable product, because a lot of times they tend to over develop or over engineer an initial version to prove, a hypothesis about the market. What kind of advice would you give to founders at that stage who, are in the process of building an MVP, but at that stage they have limited resources. They can't go and hire a team of 5, 10 engineers and develop a fully blown, product. What would you say in terms of, advice to how to prioritize or really narrow down how to define an MVP?
That is a great question. And I think that having helped some startups and founders through this, and even some internal groups that function like startups, just figuring out where to start, really understanding who your ICP is and the problem that you're solving. If what you're even thinking about or what you're considering, because it's really easy to stack those features on and to blow it up. If you don't have that key understanding of what the problems are to your ICP, and the problem that you're solving, there needs to be alignment there. So you might be seeing a gap or a problem that you want to solve, and you may hear something slightly different from your ICP. At that point, you need to figure out if you need to adjust or if you need to validate what you're hearing from them. So there's a certain amount of alignment that has to come from the problem you're solving and the ICP that you're targeting. And then utilizing that problem-centric prioritization even at that level. And then I would say to start with high fidelity mockups, start really small, and even just do a test, learn, iterate on a high fidelity mockup. Even if you can just do it in a sandbox where you can get some people using it to get some really early feedback from people that you really want to attract, who are willing to pay for whatever it is that you're building. Start there. It's okay to add on and to iterate, but that MVP really does need to be minimum, right? It has to have value, but it's you can add on later. That's the whole point to an MVP and developing in that perspective. So know your ICP, understand your problem to solve, align them, and then start with a high fidelity mockup that you can get some feedback.
Okay, great. Awesome. So scenario number two, which I do see quite a bit as well, which is startups that are selling into the higher end of the market, enterprise, and especially at the early stages where, they're excited to be able to talk to, a large, well-recognized logo, and they start to get feedback. And one of the things that potentially can happen is that this startup ends up becoming a custom dev shop or a skunkworks type of, project for one large company. How do you advise companies or startups to avoid falling into that scenario?
I'll go ahead and answer that. So a lot of with that is managing expectations and keeping an open dialogue. Them understanding that what their ask is equating to this type of dev work or this type of design work is oftentimes eye-opening, because they don't understand that this is actually a bigger ask than what they're flippantly saying. So a lot of times dealing with in client services for bigger companies and smaller companies, them understanding that we want to partner with you, but this ask is going to take this much time within our capacity to get the product to where you want it to be. And specifically saying, hey, this is actually, we're doing this because we do view you as the VIP, but we want you to understand that this is going to cost more, or this is going to take longer than you anticipated because of the ask. But being lucid and being clear and managing those expectations, I find they can't argue with the truth. And sometimes you've gotta be blunt about it. Done that. I understand how nerve-wracking that can be, but usually they'll listen. These people have usually been through the trenches as well.
Yeah. If I could, oh, go ahead, Helena.
Can I add on to that too, to say that I think this is one of those examples where aligning early on to understand, like, again, how much weight does one person or one company's feedback merit is important. And that I mean, sometimes it's really hard because that customer might be your single paying customer or your highest paying customer. But I think that to avoid becoming their personal dev shop, you can take it back to understanding to how applicable all of these, what the requests might be to the rest of your customers. Because what if there's a chance that some of these things that they're asking for actually will be applicable and help you get other customers, make more revenue, expand into other countries or other geographies or regions, create a new version of a different service. So I think critically looking at what the ask is, what the capacity you have may be, and then weighing that against what that might allow you to do. And if it doesn't allow you to do anything else, then having a realignment conversation, like Sarah was saying, I think is very critical, even though it might be kind of scary.
Cool. If I could ask a follow-on question to this scenario, and I'll tell you about the third one in a second. So, oftentimes to sell your product into an enterprise type of customer, they require certain things such as compliance or, specific integrations that are almost table stakes to get into these larger types of deals. How do you advise founders and builders to prioritize between focusing on building the next, new feature request that could solve a broader market versus spending time and prioritizing to build just to get the table stakes to sell into enterprise? Does that make sense?
I think doing the decision matrix and prioritization scorecard is key. Thinking about the ROI, we've had to do this a lot of times with teams coming in operationally and talking about, okay, where does this look like within your KPIs and ROI? How does it look like in the product roadmap? Asking those questions, the business impact questions, because this happens so often where it's just it's just maintenance or growth. And sometimes it's a combination of doing both. Sometimes it's a hard discussion like Helena and I just spoke about, like, hey, this is not going to happen in the time span that you want, but we do have it on the roadmap. But again, you have to look back at the numbers and the questions and the scorecard. It's kind of easier just to put it written out like that and talking to your team, talking through it.
Okay, cool. All right, let me ask my third question, and then there's a few coming from the audience that I want to make sure we get to. So, third very common scenario is we've got startups and founders that are, already have a good amount of users using their product on a weekly, monthly, daily active, user basis. Okay. And so maybe they've implemented some sort of product analytics like a mixed panel or amplitude. So the question is, maybe they've set up these dashboards and it's just a bunch of charts through these tools. What should they be looking for in terms of gathering product usage level data to make informed decisions on product development?
I addressed this very super briefly in the leveraging the existing data that you have. And so I think this is where you want to take a look at, yeah, Mixpanel has some really great info, but it gives you data, not necessarily insights, right? And so this is where I think that you want to go beyond just that basics and then really look at what's the entry point and how are they moving through the product. What does it look like when your user is actually making their way through the product? Where are they spending their time? And time spent in an app or on a website isn't necessarily a good thing all the time if they're spending so much time just trying to figure out what they're trying to do, if they can't figure out what they're doing and move on. So understand what's important to you. So if time spent is not an important metric to you, then you don't need to look at that if that's something that Mixpanel or something is going to be surfacing to you. But really it's digging into the what's, the whys, and the hows, and going deeper than that surface level. So that's going to mean plugging those data sources in and maybe taking a look at some of the trends. If you see that they're spending a lot of time in this one space, do you have any sort of customer interview or support chat notes or sales notes that you can surface that have spoken about some of these keywords, and then just start to see what they tell you? And you might start to see a trend. It's like, oh, they're spending time here, more time here than we want them to be, because they're simply trying to figure out this thing, which then could inform you for a feature or functionality that might be missing, right? Or it could tell you that maybe you need some prompts to help surface how to properly use this to be faster.
Cool. Awesome. All right, let's go through rapid fire. A couple of questions that came in from the audience. Vanessa is asking about the OKR slide. Was there a particular tool or platform that you used to align product roadmap with OKRs?
I will say that for me personally, for us, and Sarah, you might have some that you can recommend, but a lot of the companies I've worked for of all sizes, they were not that savvy with aligning the OKRs with their product roadmap in a tool that does the alignment for them. It was just literally speaking to it in meetings and physically adding it to whatever software is used for development of the roadmap, whether that's Jira or something else.
I used a lot Asana and integrated it with Jira. I'm not gonna lie, it was by seats and it got pricey, but I've been at companies that it was literally a spreadsheet and Excel and it worked exactly the same. So it was just not as pretty and not as fun.
It doesn't have to be elegant.
Yes.
Okay. And then let me combine questions from both Luciano and Arthur, because I think they're somewhat related. It's about ICP, your TAM, and SOM. And let me
Mm.
kind of focus the question a little bit. So in terms of how do you prioritize which ICP that you're building for in regards to your, total addressable market, your service addressable market, service attainable market, TAM, SOM, right? How do you prioritize and identify what's the right ICP in order to develop the right product set or feature set for them?
Would you like me to go, Sarah? Yeah, I get fired up with this one.
Yeah, you do get fired up at this one. And I was just trying to make it as simple as possible because I know it's 12:02, but this has been a particular point of contention. Go ahead, Helena.
Well, okay, so it is because I've listened to hundreds of pitches, and this is where I usually see the pitch from a founder start to go a little sideways. It's the lack of specificity for your SOM. The more specific you can get for your SOM, the easier it's going to be for you to identify and further drill down to your ICP, because you can't chase everybody. And within your SOM, the more specific you can get, the more you can start to see what this overlay and like a Venn diagram looks like. I'm sorry, yes, I'm that old. I like a Venn diagram. It's how my brain thinks. The more specific you get to the center of that, that's going to help you dictate or like trail that down from your SOM to your ICP. And you can have multiples, but just know who you're going to hit first, and that should very tightly align to the problem that you're solving. So you should be able to ladder it up, and it should be able to funnel down, right? Your SOM should be really specific, and then your ICP should be a subset of that, and then your markets and things further drilling down.
Exactly. And this is what we were alluding to, or what I was saying in slide 5 is we've seen so many that, people say, oh, femtech, it's a $2 trillion business, but that's not who you're really going after. You can't speak to all those people. And the investors, they're frustrated. They're seeing that, but like, who is your target market? Who is specifically as specific as possible? And that's your ICP, and that's the potential that the investor sees.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap things up in terms of next steps. So yeah, please flip to the next slide. Thank you. So those of you that are still with us, thank you for staying a little bit over. If there is a particular topic that you would like to hear us address in a future session, go ahead and email my team member, Justin at muckercapital.com. We've got these sessions planned every month, and we've got the next one on a topic of sales compensation for startups. So stay tuned for that. If you guys do need help and would like to contact Sarah or Helena, you could email them at the email address info@mindthegapservices.com. I'm sure they will be more than happy to even connect with you on LinkedIn or other, channels. But yeah, definitely reach out to them. Or you can reach out to me if you are a Mucker portfolio company. Happy to help out as well. And then lastly, if you are a founder and need not only capital, but also hands-on help addressing topics like this, we encourage you to go and submit your application to Mucker's website. We do have an accelerator program that many of our very early stage startups, founders at the beginning of their founder journey, that's more suitable for them. we also, invest at the seed and Series A level. So definitely go to the website if you've never been and check out, how we help founders. All right. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you, Sarah and Helena, for sharing your expertise and insights with us. We'll see everyone at the next session. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.